this week's episode of Inside the Capitol, I'm Jason Adkins, Executive Director of the Minnesota Catholic Conference. Glad to be with you. Usually I'm here with Maggie Henge, our Policy Associate, but Maggie is in Washington, D.C. this week at the Catholic Social Ministry Gathering, which is a nationwide gathering of leaders and advocates from the Catholic community from all over the country who come to D.C. to be informed and equipped and engaged to be advocates for the gospel and Catholic social teaching. And then there's a component where they go on Capitol Hill visits. So Maggie will be joining and leading a number of advocates from our Catholic community from across the state in meetings with members of Congress and their staff this week. So we're excited that Maggie's out there. We'll be sure to upload photos and videos from her trip to D.C., but that's a really important way in which we can also be present in our nation's capital. Most of the work that the Minnesota Catholic Conference does is at the state level, but occasionally we do partner with our friends at the USCCB's Office of Government Relations and then our partners in Catholic Charities, Catholic Relief Services, Catholic Rural Life, and other organizations to advocate for the common good. So we miss Maggie this week, but she'll be back, and we're looking forward to what she's learned, what's going on at Capitol Hill, and of course, new Congress and a new administration. It's a big week again here at the Minnesota State Capitol. Last week, the Minnesota Supreme Court held that 68 members are required to create a quorum. So when the Democrats did not show up because of the lack of a power-sharing agreement with House Republicans, there were only 67 Republicans present. Essentially what happened is that all the legislative activities since January 14th when the legislature opened were wiped away. Meetings this week have been canceled. Members are still taking meetings, but we await to see what kind of agreement can be struck between Republicans and Democrats in the House before a special election. Meanwhile, on the Senate side, there's a power-sharing agreement, so committee meetings are held, the gavel's being passed back and forth, and there are meaningful meetings and legislative discussions going on. But still, a lot of key issues. Because of these tensions and these dynamics, the need to really focus this session in a year of divided government on getting a budget done, the Catholic bishops of Minnesota submitted a letter to the governor and legislative leaders urging them to not waste time legalizing gambling and sports gambling and online sports gambling. Now you might say, well, why is this a big issue? What's wrong with gambling? Now certainly social gambling is a common and accepted a practice. Often for years there was bingo in our churches or in Knights of Columbus halls. But what we're talking about being legalized here is something of a different variety altogether. And that's basically putting a sports book in everyone's pocket through their cell phone, 24/7 access to gambling. We think it's a dangerous thing to do. We think it's going to have a whole host of social, negative social consequences, policy consequences for zero benefit to the state, but potentially lots of costs. Increased family fragmentation, increased bankruptcies, increased partner abuse, you name it. The statistics are coming in as we see this experiment in federalism unfolding since 2018 when the U.S. Supreme Court allowed states to go ahead and legalize sports gambling as a result of a lawsuit. Since then, 39 states in the District of Columbia have legalized sports gambling. Minnesota is one of 11 states not to thus far, and we're encouraging them not to do so. Now, you might think to yourself, wait a second, we've got FanDuel Sports Network, we've got DraftKings, I see all the commercials, I hear all the commercials, what's going on? All those platforms, to the extent that they are operating, are doing so in an extra legal environment. Those platforms should not be engaging in commerce here in Minnesota, as a lot of those forms of gambling that those platforms promote is in fact illegal. Now, one of the arguments, of course, is, well, there's a black market, and if we regulate it, the black market goes away. That's not necessarily true unless you have law enforcement cracking down on it. In fact, in Massachusetts, for example, one study found that the black market didn't go away at all, and maybe even grew a little bit simply because you've normalized an industry, you've created demand for it, and oftentimes the black market can provide better incentives, lower costs, et cetera, et cetera. So some of the programs and betting platforms that they provide. So just like with marijuana, you create demand for a product, and the black market is still going to exist because the regulated product is often more expensive. So ultimately, end of the day, the harms of gambling expansion don't offset the costs to the state. To legalize a recreation for a very limited number of people who can internalize and absorb those debts is not worth a cost to the state. In the proposals that have been offered thus far, the state gets very little money in terms of tax revenue going into the general fund. So again, who benefits and who really pays a price for this, it's really all of us, because it's not just about the person who spends the money and makes the bets, it's about the impact, the financial impact, especially of everyone around them. College savings being lost, for example. We're seeing from studies that college savings, or savings generally, are being diverted into paying gambling debts. So the data is emerging. There's no rush into this. It's a budget year. We don't need to be spending time, especially as all the data comes in about the harms of gambling expansion. The bishops called that out, and it's really important that legislators stay focused on what serves Minnesotans and the common good. One other thing that is important to mention this week is that the governor's budget came out. And in the governor's budget, he looks at the fiscal forecast based on the November forecast, and then says, okay, legislators, as you get to work developing a budget, here is my budget proposals. And then there'll be a February forecast, which sometimes comes out in March, but then that will be the forecast on which they base their constitutional mandate to provide a balanced budget, and that's the budget they're working from. Sometimes then the governor will provide an alternative, a revised budget proposal, and that will shape a lot of those legislative discussions around the budget. So a little bit of legislative process there for you. Unfortunately, the governor in his proposed budget cut, in fact not just cut, eliminated entirely about $100 million over the biennium, the non-public student pupil aid. So the state makes a commitment under statute 123B.40 to provide essential services for all students, no matter what school they attend. So we're talking about busing aid, transportation aid, that's one bucket. And that comes in all different forms. And then there's instructional aids like textbooks and standardized testing, there's nursing aid and healthcare, and there's counseling aid, that's guidance counseling and mental health as well. We think this is the wrong time for the state to be turning its backs on students who are in non-public schools, especially when we're talking about such basic and core services as mental health, academic counseling, academic excellence with a form of textbooks and standardized testing, all these things. And then how many of our students in non-public schools are reliant on those bus routes to get to school, especially when their parents are working and can't afford to do so. So there's an equity piece in here. We're really, it's a discriminatory proposal, really, against students in non-public schools. So we are alerting the Catholic community that this is something that they need to be concerned about. We want to give legislators the opportunity to do the right thing, so we want to be patiently and prudently and proactively reaching out to our elected officials, especially through our Catholic schools and our Catholic school leadership, to let them know about this issue, let them know this is something they should tell the governor that he needs to pull in his revised budget, and this is a proposal that, as these budget and legislative discussions unfold, is dead on arrival. That is our fundamental message, precisely because of the impact and the harms of these potential cuts, eliminating non-public aid altogether. So watch out for that. Watch out for one-pagers and action alerts that you can use to be an advocate for non-public school students and Catholic school students in our communities as well. This is just 0.5% of the overall education budget. This is the wrong place to be looking for education dollars, or to places to cut and places to spend, because ultimately we save the state, our Catholic schools save the state hundreds of millions of dollars each year by educating students and not imposing those costs on the public schools. So we think this is an issue that benefits our students and our families, but also the common good as well. So look out for more education and more information regarding those harmful potential cuts to non-public pupil aid. We are confident that if the Catholic community and all the other non-public school stakeholders raise this issue with our elected officials in a reasonable manner, that reasonable heads will in fact prevail on that. Thanks so much for joining us over this week on Inside the Capitol. As always, join the Catholic Advocacy Network at mncatholic.org to stay up on what's going on at the Capitol. And again, be prepared to join us for February 7th for Adoration at the Capitol, where we will pray and intercede for our elected officials and pray for our state and its well-being. Thanks again. God bless you all.